I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传世鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。
Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you all happen to be today. It is a beautiful, sunny, and somewhat cooler than it has been Sunday in Indianapolis. We've had a string of some serious heat and humidity out here in the low to middle 90s, with humidity at about the same mark, and it just gets oppressively muggy around here when it gets that hot and humid. So it was a welcome relief to have the temperature down in the upper 70s and the humidity much lower. Just a gorgeous sunny day. We've got all kinds of birds running around in the front yard, cicadas in the trees, you know, the sounds and sights of Indiana summer, and I just live for that. I love it all. I intended to post the picture of the caterpillar I found last week, but I forgot to do that. So I'll try and do that for next week, just because it was kind of cool. But be that as it may. Today I want to start off on yet another discussion that centers on the Tao and involves the practices of Tai Chi Chuan. I guess the last series I did on like that, which we just finished up, met with some fairly good press, and so we'll keep heading in that direction and just see how it goes. This particular topic on utilizing the principles of softness is going to get rather involved, but it's absolutely worth having the discussion, because the principles of non-contention, the principles of softness, are so beneficial to us, not just in the martial pursuits, but in day-to-day living. I can't overstress enough to the folks that I teach how much the practice of Tai Chi Chuan is not just a martial discipline. It truly is part of a Tao-centric path to get through life. And when I talk about getting through life, I'm talking about with more joy and happiness, with fewer problems, with a more keenly developed sense of direction, with more wisdom, with more fun and better relationships, and all of the things that we hope to develop as we cultivate the Tao teachings. Really? Okay. I must, number locks off. Okay, so the technology is going to wrestle me this morning. We'll get through it anyway. I am going to take chapter 36 of the Dao De Jing somewhat completely out of context this morning, but I'm going to utilize it in that manner because the way it's written exemplifies the utilization of the principle of softness. It does. And furthermore, this chapter contains some very cool wisdom on methodologies that we might employ to accomplish what it is we're trying to get done. And over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're going to see if we can't tie that all together and actually make it make sense. So starting off here, Lao Tzu says, if one wishes to shrink it, one must first expand it. If one wishes to weaken it, one must first strengthen it. If one wishes to discard it, one must first promote it. If one wishes to seize it, one must first give it. This is called subtle clarity. The soft and weak overcomes the tough and strong. Fish cannot leave the depths. The sharp instruments of the state cannot be shown to the people. If I can here, yeah, good. I want to back up to this first slide and point out that the way Lao Tzu has written this chapter, he's stylized it in such a way that there is the appearance of opposition in each set of paired lines, shrinking and expanding, weakening and strengthening, discarding and promoting, seizing and giving. And in life, we run into situations where there's the appearance of that kind of opposition all the time. One of the examples that Derek uses fairly frequently in pointing out true opposition in complementary pairing is that of love and hate, where, as it turns out, hatred is not necessarily the opposite of love, but rather fear. And he does a wonderful discussion on why that is and how that works. But no one understands that that example is only one of multitudinous examples of those sorts of occurrences that we run into all the time. Like that, these lines appear to contain opposition, but in fact they do not. These are complementary pairs. Each one of these pairs of concepts are two sides of the same coin, if you will. They are one end that supports the other, and one end without which the other end could not exist or couldn't be understood. And further, there's practical truth in these complementary pairs that if we choose not to ignore it, is beneficial to us in getting through our day. Okay? Right off the top of my head, I can think of examples for each and every one of these things where the pairing is the truth. One of the very few mechanical pursuits I ever followed in my life as part of my career path, if you will, while I was in school actually, was as a cleanup guy and tune-up guy at a Volkswagen shop years and years and years ago. And one of the things that they did there was body work on cars that had been in accidents. And every now and again you'd have a vehicle come in that had a crease or a dent in a door panel or something. It was, where it wasn't real serious and required replacement. And in order to repair it, in order to get that deformity in the metal to pull out, the person who did the body work would apply heat, which would expand the metal. And then as it cooled, the metal would shrink, and as part of the process of shrinking would pull the imperfections out. It was really the neatest thing to watch when I first saw it, because quite frankly I didn't think it would work. And when it did, I was awestruck, because I'd not previously seen anything like that happen. That's a direct application of line 1. And in point of fact, it is the truth. In terms of weakening and strengthening, one of the things I have the highest of respect and regard for is the manufacture of the Japanese katana, the longsword. It is perhaps one of the finest pieces of steel ever forged by people. And one of the techniques that's employed in the construction of that blade is a process of hardening the edge while keeping the back relatively soft. It's done by applying layers of different types of clay to the back and middle of the blade and leaving the edge uncoated. And then the blade's heat treated, which causes the edge to harden and the center and back of the blade to cool more slowly and harden less rigorously. The effect that has on the blade is that it makes the edge very hard and very sharp, but it makes the center and back of the blade more flexible and resilient. If that technique were not applied, when the blade came into contact with another blade or a piece of metal, there's a high degree of probability that it would simply shatter. But because the center and the back is more flexible and resilient, it does not. I'm not sure how many years of trial and error, practice and experience it took before somebody discovered that. But that process of intentionally weakening, if you will, the center and back of that blade turned that from a pretty good weapon into an absolutely outstanding, peerless weapon. To this day, there are very few blades made that stand up to the toughness and sharpness of some of the blades that were made back in the 14th century. So we get the point that sometimes complementary pairing isn't just a good idea, it's the law, if you will. So we have here already developing a couple of different layers of complexity, a couple of different layers of understanding, just in what Lao Tzu wrote and how he wrote it. It's no wonder he calls this subtle clarity. I've studied this chapter for years, and every time, like many others that I read it, I encounter new wisdom, something I didn't understand before, something else that can be derived from how it's written and what was written. It is indeed subtle clarity. Most importantly, perhaps, in this entire chapter is the statement that the soft and weak overcome the tough and strong. That sentence is antithetical to Western thinking about 99% of the time. It's antithetical to an awful lot of martial disciplines, no matter where the discipline originates. I have substantial experience in Japanese karate as well as Tai Chi Chuan, and I can tell you that the philosophy behind the external styles is precisely the philosophy of hardness, toughness, conditioning, and a more linear nature of conflict resolution. And yet, one can only carry on those practices for so long before the conditioning and discipline and training that hardens the body begins to destroy the body. I'm getting on towards 60 years old, and my forearms and shins and knees and elbows will no longer absorb the kind of abuse that they used to absorb when I was younger. I think that's a natural process, and please understand I'm not denigrating anybody else's martial training. All I'm saying is that, you know, the continual conditioning of the joints and the bones can eventually get to the point where it is detrimental to one's health. In the practices of Tai Chi Chuan, what I find is that the softer and more flexible I become, the more powerful I become. I'm not resisting the processes of aging. I'm adapting to them. And when I first started this practice, that didn't seem like that was going to be a wholly effective way to run the railroad. But over the years, I have discovered it is remarkably effective and extremely powerful. However, for the most part, the supposition that the soft and weak can overcome the tough and strong is still regarded as a folly and foolishness. Well, okay. We'll see if we can't illustrate why this might be so and why it's so doggone important. I'm going to leave the last two lines for next week. So please pretend I didn't put them in here, but we will use them. I'd like to instead move on to the classics of Tai Chi Chuan. This is attributed to Zhansong Feng, translated by Li Shiel, whom I have found to do a remarkably high-quality job of translating and interpreting. And if you're interested, I'll be happy to send you information on where this can be found. Zhansong Feng says, all movements are motivated by the mind intent, not external form. If there is up, there is down. When advancing, have regard for withdrawing. When striking left, pay attention to the right. If the mind intent wishes to move upwards, it must also have intent downwards. Insubstantial and substantial must be clearly differentiated. At any place where there is insubstantiality, there must be substantiality. Every place has both insubstantial and substantial. In motion, Qi separates into yin and yang. In stillness, yin and yang fuse into Qi. I've taken the liberty of not including the pinyin terms in here, both to save space and to hopefully quash confusion. If anybody has questions, I'll be happy to put those back in. What Zhansong Feng talks about here in different terminology is precisely the very same complementary pairing, the very same concepts of softness and flexibility that Lao Tzu references in chapter 36. When Zhansong Feng speaks of the substantial and insubstantial, he's speaking of weight distribution and motion. Okay? Pardon? When he speaks about advancing and withdrawing, we're talking about moving forwards and backwards. When he speaks of striking left and right, pan and ku, those terms are in motion as well. And he utilizes these terms such that the student learns at some point to utilize those two competing forces together to do what's called uprooting an opponent. Think, if you will, of the opponent's root or of your own root as the connection between yourself and the earth, the stability of your feet as they connect to the earth beneath you, the distribution of your weight and your center of mass, the placement of your center of gravity, your posture, the orientation of the hands and feet, and your ability to move with agility and quickness around that center. One of the things that Tai Chi Chuan does better in a martial capacity than virtually any other art is uprooting the opponent, that is, taking the opponent off balance, causing them to either fall down, sit down, or move somewhere where they didn't originally intend to go. And that's done utilizing these principles of opposition, such as advancing and retreating and moving left and right. Granted, this is an oversimplification of that discussion, but by, for instance, using pushing and pulling forces at the same time, one can create what's called insubstantiability or falseness on one side of an opponent and place the majority of the opponent's weight, that is substantiality, on the other side, creating an imbalance in the body and causing the opponent to become unbalanced. Okay. One of the other things that allows us to do that is called Tao, yielding, where one allows the opponent to believe that he's going to successfully complete an aggression of some description, but simply by allowing our bodies to move out of the way, the opponent winds up overextended and out of balance, leaning one way or another. Along with this body of text, Zhan Song Feng says that one can move 1,000 pounds with 4 ounces, and in fact cites that repeatedly in the classics as one of the mysteries of the practice of Tai Chi Chuan. This is accomplished not through force. Quite the contrary. It is accomplished by allowing the opponent to go where they were already headed. By neutralizing and yielding an opponent, we allow the expenditure of that person's energy to carry them far beyond where they ever thought they'd wind up. It takes virtually no effort whatsoever on my part to send one of my students flying across the room. There's a life lesson there as well. I wouldn't simply be sitting here chatting about how to beat somebody up. Those principles in the practice of Tui So, pushing hands, and Tai Chi Chuan rely on mental and physical agility. The mind intent has to be quick and agile first. Otherwise, one can't think quickly enough to make the body light and agile in motion. And the movement of the body has to be connected, seamless, and unified. We don't move as a collection of parts, but as an integrated whole. And that movement has to have direction and purpose. Well, pardon. That is done, excuse me, just exactly as described. And at no point in the classics does Zhan Song Feng speak of overcoming force with force, but rather with yielding and with softness. The other thing it's important to note is that in all movement there is some stillness, and in all stillness there is some motion. No person is ever completely motionless, and no person is ever completely in motion. There is always a part of us that remains in the preceding state. This is important for the consideration of yin and yang. The symbol, if you examine it, has a little circle of white in the black side and a little circle of black in the white side, representing the fact that in all yin there is some yang, and in all yang some yin. It's not completely pure. In all of these complementary pairs, the thing that makes them function is the presence of a little bit of one in the other. Lao Tzu says that the softest things enter into things that have no openings. He says that the weak overcomes the tough and the strong, that the soft overcomes the hard. That which is rigid and inflexible grows old and soon dies. Those things are all not so subtle hints as to the necessity of understanding this principle of softness. And this common thread runs throughout the teachings of Lao Tzu and Zhang Songfeng both. Okay? Both of these publications, both of these classics, rely on the mind intent first, what we call the Xin, or the Yi. It is the intent of the individual's will. It is where we're trying to go, what we're trying to do, and how it is we hope to get there, no matter what it is. Everything begins with the mind intent. How we accomplish the mind intent is differentiated between those who cultivate the teachings and those who do not, between those who understand the necessity for yielding and softness and non-contention and those who do not. And please understand, once again, I'm not denigrating those who haven't yet achieved that understanding, but simply describing the condition of not understanding. The more we understand the effect of softness and non-contention on others, the more important it becomes to utilize that softness. Even in the settling of a conflict using the martial disciplines, Zhang Songfeng says that yielding and softness is the way to win. It is the way to proceed. And quite frankly, in life, as in the practice of Tai Chi Chuan, yielding and softness is the only way to end the conflict without creating ill will, bad feelings, or damage. Could I choose to settle contention and conflict with force and violence and throwing my weight around and being all bellicose and big? Sure, I could do that. But doing that, although I may initially win the encounter, is not going to benefit me in the long term. The person who has been the object of that bellicosity is not going to leave the encounter feeling like they've been blessed or dealt with even a modicum of respect or dignity. They're going to feel like they got beaten up. I've been in that position. I don't enjoy it very much, and I don't suppose other people do either. It is by far better if we can maintain the agility of our mind, hold on to our integrity, not compromise our values, and yet softly and gently redirect the energy of the conflict, be it verbal or physical, to a successful end rather than a continuation of that conflict. The desire of my mind and heart is never to hurt anyone, physically, mentally, or any other way if I can possibly avoid it. And I make it my responsibility to make sure that I do not. In other words, it isn't just sufficient for me to say I don't want to hurt somebody. You're right. I mean, that's great lip service, but it doesn't necessarily accomplish the goal. I actively pursue not hurting somebody, whether I'm teaching them in class, whether I'm interacting with them personally or professionally, whether it's a complete stranger on the street, it doesn't make any difference. And I don't allow the other person's goals and motivations to cause me to differentiate that softness and yielding from anything else that I might want to do. I actively pursue that softness, yielding, and non-contentious approach. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about how it is we do that. Just know and understand for the moment that this is such a big deal that I actually work very hard at making sure I practice that in every encounter I come across. There's also a common thread of a certain amount of emotional detachment that helps to make the softness and yielding work. It is difficult to be both heavily emotionally invested in a situation and soft and yielding at the same time. If we have a need to be right, a need to impose our will, a need to win for whatever reason, or some other emotionally driven need to participate in whatever contention is going on at the moment, the likelihood that we're going to back down and adopt that softer and gentler approach is severely diminished. Our emotions can get in the way of our best intentions without an awful lot of effort. And so it's important, as we're being the soft and flexible and agile people we're endeavoring to be, to also try to be a bit emotionally detached from the situation that's in front of us. I do this with people by trying to remember that they're just another soul on the path trying to find their way home too. And so I don't ascribe a bunch of personal issues to them that I otherwise might be able to accuse them of having, no matter how bad they want to argue. And I have abandoned force. I encourage all of you to do the same. When I tell you guys that I no longer foresee an event occurring where it's necessary for me to harm or kill somebody, understand that that is both a commitment and a choice. I choose not to utilize force with other people. I just won't do it. I far prefer and have practiced for years to develop the ability to do what's called moving with benevolence. That is the ability to redirect the energy of an opponent without causing harm and injury to them. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want that on my conscience. I don't want it on my mind. I don't even want to participate in a situation where it's likely to occur. I can't always control what other people do. I definitely can't control what other people say or think. But I can choose what I do, and I can choose what I say and how I respond and how I think. And I choose to abandon overcoming a situation by force. Abandoning force doesn't mean you can't have strongly held opinions, and it doesn't mean that you have to abandon your moral compass, convictions, or integrity. It simply means that you don't enforce those things through the application of force, whether it's verbal or physical, either one. Next time we get together, we're going to talk about a concept called the correct touch. This is not associated with the stuffed monkey. This term is specific to the practice of Tai Chi Chuan. And I promise it will be interesting and hopefully enlightening. And I surely hope that it's beneficial for you. Realizing that this is kind of the introduction to a whole nother series of concepts here, I understand that this particular talk may appear to be a little disconnected. I'm going to ask you all to bear with me. We are going to tie this together over the next couple of weeks. But still, I'd like to give you something to take away from this that may be beneficial to you. And so, let's start with, there are a lot of ways that we can employ to achieve our goals and desires. Some of them more effective than others. Some of them are more beneficial to us than others. But there are just a plethora of ways we can go about trying to achieve what we want to do. Generally speaking, I've found the methods that we employ that produce the least amount of intrusion and the lowest amount of trauma on the people we're interacting with tend to be more effective and more beneficial to us than those that are more intrusive and more traumatic. And so I'm going to suggest that as we examine our interpersonal interactions and the various conflicts that pop up in our days, that we try perhaps to think about what's going to cause less ill will, less trauma, fewer intrusions than those that are we might perhaps fall into as a result of comfort level and the way we've always handled things in the past. We can always choose to be more peaceful, less contentious, and less forceful every time we deal with a situation. We're not stuck in a pattern of behaviors. We can choose. And I'm kind of hoping that as we go through these discussions, maybe I'll be able to help provide some suggestions for more ways to do that are effective and useful for you. You all have a great Sunday. Thank you so much for letting me share with you. And I absolutely hope something I said was useful for someone.
Thank you, Bill. I found the talk fascinating, and I'm sure many people did as well. Wanted to give you a bit of good news, and that is from the beginning, when you connected to go to webinar to right now, your audio has been completely clear and unbroken. At least on my side, I did not hear any static. It all just came through in very stable fashion.
Outstanding. That's wonderful.
Indeed. And by the way, I really enjoy the example that you provided about the katana, the art of creating this devastating weapon of battle that incorporates Tao principles as well.
It does indeed. And it's not real well known that that's the case, but thank you.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架3鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，3鞠躬，持架多一点传世1鞠躬，接班1鞠躬。We are done, everybody. Thank you so much.